Welcome, welcome everybody. We can grab more chairs if we need. There's a couple over there. So welcome to Brody. I usually work at a Brody. Welcome to Brody, but we're not at Brody. Welcome to Marydale Black Library. For anybody who has never been before, there's two doors right here as well as this back door. Public washrooms, if you walk through this door to your left, they're right there along with water fountain bottle filler if you need it. This door here is an alarmed emergency exit. So if you press that bar, the very loud alarm is going to go off. If it's a fire, please feel free to do so. Otherwise, if you're just looking for fresh air, please go that way. We are super thrilled to have Superior Seed. Do you go producers or savers? Producers. I keep calling you savers because you say we're savers too. Superior Seed producers are here for our second in a series called Eat Your Backyard. So if you missed last month's session, it's been filmed and it'll be available online. So I think your YouTube channel, and we'll be linking it on our Thunder Bay Public Library one as well. So last month's was all about your seed catalog, and tonight is planning your garden, which seems to be very popular already. If you have any questions from the library staff, come grab us. Otherwise, I shall turn it over to you folks. Do you want me to grab anything else? Are you good? Grab any stuff? Yeah. Okay. If you decide you want more printouts, somebody just can grab them and I'll get you whatever you need.
Okay.
I can run out there.
Perfect. Okay, so maybe I'll just start by introducing myself. My name is Evalisa, and I run Root Cellar Gardens, which is like a small market garden, and I also grow seeds out there. And I guess just to kind of set the stage for where we're all at, so we're going to ask you guys about how and where you're gardening. I grow on 2 acres of gillies, and I'm trying to remember what the other things we wanted to ask people about. Where I garden, I've been gardening for 15 years, farming for 15 years, and the thing that I am most excited about growing this year in my garden, I was thinking about that on the way here, is probably watermelons. And so we'll all just take our turns introducing ourselves, and then we'll open the floor in case anybody wants to introduce themselves to us.
Go. Should I go? I'm Renata Weber, and I've been farming, well, not the last few years, but since 2005, I used to own Mile Hill Farms, and have worked with Ev for years farming, and I've grown a lot of garlic and onions in my lifetime, and raised livestock there too, had beef cattle, and did grain and hay, and had a few acres of garden going there all the time too. So yeah, I'm really excited to be here tonight.
And what are you most excited to grow this summer?
Oh, what am I most excited to? Garlic. But if there's something new I'm excited to grow, I've always grown bush beans because I don't like to have to trellis things. That's one of my irritations in a big garden, is putting up these huge trellises. So I'm really excited to grow some really tall pole beans, which I got recently. So.
Hi, my name is Ayano, and I am not a professional farmer. I am a backyard gardener, and I grow about 500 pounds of food on 500 square feet of backyard. I've been doing this for probably about 8 years now. I moved to Thunder Bay 10 years ago and started gardening basically for the first time in my life. Loved it, picked it up, met lots of great friends and new people along the way. What am I most excited about? Probably still my shishito peppers. So shishito peppers, they're, I guess, mostly sweet, but 1 in 20 is really hot kind of pepper from Japan. You can find the peppers at Metro. They sell them there. They're pretty expensive. And they're like about this big, the size of your finger. So they're a Japanese heirloom, and when I first started growing them, I was getting maybe like 600 grams from a plant. Gradually over the years, as I save the best seed and grow from those, I've gotten it up to over 1 kilogram per plant. So I'm really hoping I can make like 1.2 kilos this year. Yeah, that'd be nice.
And I guess just to make it state the obvious, the one thing that we have in common is that we're all, well, Renata is a past member and probably future member of Superior Seed Producers. And so that's who's putting this little event on. So we all have kind of an eye towards seed, which will come out in our presentation today. But maybe, does anybody want to tell us who they are and where they grow and what they're excited about growing this year? Challenge by choice. You don't have to. Okay, then I'm just going to ask some questions because I actually am genuinely curious about where folks are at. So maybe just by show of hands, if folks are comfortable, who here has grown a garden before? Okay. And is there anybody who's planning on growing their first garden this summer? And how many folks are growing in, let's say, in the city? Okay. And then how many folks are growing in like containers, like in small spaces, patios, that kind of thing?
Both. I do both.
Yeah. Okay, and then does anybody want to tell us what you're most excited about growing this year? Yeah?
I'm excited about actually having something produced.
That's something I'm always very excited about too. Yeah.
I've spent
100%.
a lot of time, a lot of years, trying different things and getting very little product at the end.
Yeah.
I'm really hoping I'm going to learn something more.
Awesome. Great. Well, hopefully you can take something away from this that helps you with that too. Yeah.
I'm excited to grow carrots because we recently moved into a new house where the previous homeowner had started all the gardens. So we moved in the fall, so I was able to harvest all the carrots.
Good deal.
Yeah. Amazing. And some of them were this long.
Oh my gosh.
And it was just incredible. So I had to hold the carrots since I was a kid. So
Oh my god. Fun.
take advantage of all of her hard work.
Yeah, that's a great treat. Yeah.
I'm excited about trying to grow successful cucumbers this year.
For pickling or slicing or?
Pickling,
Yeah. Awesome. That's really exciting too. Yeah.
I'm excited. I work in childcare and I'm gardening with children. And I'm looking forward to growing things like spinach where we can grow it and then make something with it. And then enjoy it together.
Yeah. That's so sweet. I mean, that's one of the best parts about growing your own food, right? Is just sharing in the making and the enjoying of it. Yeah.
I also do winter sewing with kids that have some mental disabilities in the schools. And last year with that much snow, it wasn't bad, but I already have 30 kids that are lined up to starting in a couple of weeks, and I'm like, I have to touch my containers now, more than that. But they were so thrilled and excited about it, even those that their stuff only grew this tall. And I brought a bunch of stuff so they could make baskets to take home for Mother's Day for their parents, for their moms and that, but that to me is, I've done a lot of it, but these kids, it's a little bit different, so a handful of seeds to them is like right there on the spot rather than spreading.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
But you still get to see the magic of seeds, right?
Oh, yeah.
Which is so cool.
Yeah, they're all seeds that I've saved so that I know that it's gonna produce for them.
Yeah,
And so,
that's really cool.
I'm more interested in perennial things.
Okay.
I don't have a plan.
Yeah, so you can do it once and then it's also a very smart strategy.
Like I have the Egyptian onions,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Of course, I would have the mint because it's so they used to. Well, I have lots of berries, I got cherries and things like that. But I like to have a more, some more rich.
Cool. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I like that idea of
Yeah, I have
perennials
to
too.
read it.
Anybody else? Okay, well maybe we'll get started with our presentation.
So I'm gonna start it off. We're gonna kind of break it into three parts. I'm gonna talk about preparing and crafting your garden, and and you. And it's gonna talk about planning your garden, like where it's gonna go, what you wanna put in there, and Evalisa is gonna talk about setting your garden up for saving seeds. So, I'm really nervous about talking in front of people, which is funny because I'm in blabbermouth, but I haven't spoken in front of people for a while, and I didn't put my glasses on. Okay, alright, I'm good. So, here's think Ev in her garden. No, somebody else.
It's okay, it's fair.
Anyways, there's Farron in Ev's garden. So, anyways, I'm just gonna start. I started gardening when I first had kids, and I had a little townhouse, and I had a little tiny garden in the back. And halfway through the summer, like in the spring, the spinach came up. The kids were eating out of the garden, eating spinach in the garden, playing with rabbits, and I loved it. And halfway through the year, all of a sudden the weeds were up to my waist, and I was like, what the heck happened? You know? And of course, it kind of went by the wayside. And sometimes when you're gardening, things get overwhelming, and it gets to be too much, and you're halfway through the summer, and you're like, just a second, I had all these great plans, and I want to go to camp, or I want to go swimming, and I got to go pull all these weeds out, and it sucks, and I hate gardening. So, I think that when you set up your garden, you can do things to set it up so that it can be a place you enjoy getting to, where weeding you feel like is therapeutic, not like you hate it, where you can really just get into it, be there, get the things done that need to happen, like watering, weeding and things, so it's quick and easy and doesn't become painful and overwhelming and you never want to do it again. So I know a few people I talked to during COVID, when a lot of people started gardening, they put gardens in and then found it to be overwhelming and too much, right? Because the first year you turn your soil, there's going to be weeds and there's a lot of preparation has to happen. So that's kind of what I want to talk about right now. When you walk into your garden and in your backyard, there's going to be areas where there's more shade and more sun. So you can see here, there's sun, there's shade. And during the day, if you go in your backyard or your front yard and you see where the sun's coming, right now it's going to be to the south, and you're going to get a lot of shade coming from anything on the south side. But in the summertime, it goes straight up and over us where we are. So you're going to have a lot more direct sun coming direct overhead. So if you look in your garden right now, you're in your backyard and you're trying to find direct sunlight, it's not going to be the same place it's going to be in the middle of the summer. So just keep that in mind when you're trying to pick where you want to have your garden. If you're having a lot of not success in your garden and things are growing really small or they're not doing well and you feel very frustrated, look at where the sun's hitting your yard. Because some plants need a lot of sun, some need at least 8 hours of sun, others need 6 and others need 4. So your lettuces and spinach and stuff can have a bit less sun than your tomatoes and your basil, they want more. So you want to think about that when you're looking where your garden's going to be. Watering, there's a lot of different options for watering. You can do it by hand and haul it from very far. I've known people who have really hauled a lot of water by bucket, myself included. I like to do things the hard way at first. And it can be done a lot easier. So you can do it by watering can, by bucket, by sprinklers, with hoses across your yard. Think about if you're going to be hitting the hose with your lawnmower or cutting it, or your children are going to be breaking your hose. Just because you have to replace things, right? So you can put water underground, and I think that's something that I dreamed of on my farm, is having underground watering to the gardens. But that's a way to keep it so that you're not going to have to ever worry about wrecking your hoses or hauling them around or putting them away or pulling them out and dragging dirt around everywhere. So you can put water underground fairly easily. So if that's something you want to think about to make your gardening a bit easier, so that you don't have to be putting things out and taking them away as much, there's different types of sprinkler systems we can use. And I know we all know these things, so I just want to kind of talk about that. You can also put in a drip irrigation system, which is what I use on quite large scales on the farm, but you can also get it for your backyard. So there's options. There's different suppliers that carry them. You can order them in within Canada, like from Dubois, Agri Innovation in Quebec. I think Toulouse might even have some in town. Some of the garden stores might have drip irrigation systems. So you just have your hose coming to the front, and you run these lines down your garden beds, and it puts a drip of water coming out. So you can turn it on and let it run for an hour or two, and it'll give you an inch or two of water in your garden. And then you turn it on in the evening. Things get watered nicely, and then this morning your plants have been taking up the water, so it's not burning off during the day, right? There's Ev, there's me. How you want to set up your garden. Sorry, I lost where I was. there's a lot of ways to set up your garden. Some of you mentioned you're gardening in pots, or a mix between pots, maybe raised beds, or maybe even in the ground in your backyard. All of those are really great ways to garden. Either, no matter what, you're gonna have to set your soil up for success. I'm trying to stick with where I was. I'm gonna stick with pots first. We're gonna go small and get big. If you're doing pots, you wanna make sure the pots you're growing in aren't too small, because your plant, whatever size your roots are, is how big your plant is gonna get. So if you have a nice big pot like this for your one tomato plant, you're gonna get a great big huge tomato plant like this on top. But if you put 4 tomato plants into a nice pot that's this big, you're gonna get 4 smaller tomato plants. So you just have to think the roots need the space to grow. So the bigger your pots, the better. I put a herb pot outside my back kitchen so I can grab herbs outside my back door really easily when I'm cooking and stuff. And it's about this big by this. And I fill it up, I've got all the herbs in there, 1 or 2 of each plant, and it supplies my kitchen all summer, which is really handy. Moving on from that, you have raised beds. This is kind of raised beds in construction here. And they can be done from wood. You can use animal water troughs. I've seen people put them up on wheels, on casters, and have them so they can move them around on their patios or on their decks. And you can put quite a lot of plants into a raised bed. It's like 8 feet. You can make them 4 by 4, 8 by 4. You want them not to be too wide because you want to be able to reach across. They're very handy for people who are having a hard time getting up and down off the ground anymore. And you can bring automatic watering in underneath the ground up into them and put your things out in your beds under, so you can just turn on the water. You can have it on a timer and go away to camp if you don't want to have a neighbor that'll come and water. And then from the raised beds, we can get into your actual garden on the ground. So that's where you're pulling soil out that's already existing in your yard, and you might have to amend it a little bit with different things to get it to grow what you want it to do. I always use raised beds in my garden. I had it like, this is the ground, I would bring it up about, the soil up about 4 to 6 inches, because I had clay soil and the water would sit and not run off. So I set my garden up so the water would drain out, and that if it was a really rainy season, the plants are up out of the water and the roots could go down as far as they needed to get more water if they wanted it, but they wouldn't drown from being sitting in water if it was a rainy season. So you can have a garden in the ground. You just, for the first few years, I used rakes and shovels to make the raised beds, and then I got a thing that would make them for me, which was I could pull behind the tractor, which was much easier. And what else did I want to say about that?
How did you manage the weeds?
How did I manage the weeds? You can see right here, there's me, and there's, I was using black plastic, which is a biodegradable option, and that was one weed management tool. If you're breaking open brand new soil in your backyard, you're gonna turn over the lawn. There's 3 ways to get the grass out. One is to actually lift it out, right, to cut the sod and pull it off in pieces. Or you can cover it for 1 season with some kind of mulch, or a very black plastic that's not gonna let any light through, and that actually rot it all away, and then you won't have any weeds at all. But it takes a year, so you have to have patience for that one. It works very well. What else do
You wanted the picture with one of me tediously hand weeding. You also, I put that in because also it's got the green manure in the aisles to keep the weeds down. You want to talk about that?
Yes, I want to talk about that. You can see here behind Ev, Ev got a really great system of green manures in her aisles. So the beds will be about this wide and a nice aisle. They have room to walk in, covered in green manure also. So green manure can be any plant you want it to winter kill so that it's not going to become a noxious weed in your garden. Clover, alfalfa, oats, summer rye, so that if what you want it to do is either add different things to your soil. You might want it to break the soil apart, like a heavy clay. You put clover into that, it breaks all little pieces apart, puts organic matter into it and nitrogen, and you have beautiful fluffy soil the next year, which had been very hard clay the previous year. But by putting green manures in, you can just run your lawnmower over the green manure during the summer, and it's adding organic matter to your garden the whole time. And it's very effective for keeping weeds back. And also here, I just want to note too, around the edge of Ev's garden, there's you can see there's a piece of material there, and that's a landscape fabric. So if you put some landscape fabric around the edge of your garden, the weeds have a much harder time getting in. So, and landscape fabric is very easy to get here, and actually I found one of the landscaping companies that supplies, like big landscaping companies, you can get hundreds of feet of it for quite a fair price in town here. And you tuck it in on both sides, and it holds the weeds back, so you don't have to, you're not weeding from things coming in from the side that are always trying to get into the garden. Is there a
I
question?
think you use a old carpet.
You can use them.
Cheap back carpet flipped over, very part under and part up and out of it.
Mm.
I've done that for years on huge gardens and never had problems.
very
with
helpful.
that coming in.
Yeah, so and any of these things, there's always options that are relatively free to, you can, if you're resourceful, you can find options of ways to, like if you wanted to cover an area of your garden with black plastic, and you're like, I don't have any black plastic to use, you can go to the lumber yards and they cover their truckloads in the black plastic, and you can use that, and they can put that down on your garden to build back grass if you wanted to. Here's Ev's garden again. I love these pictures in. So you can see here she's got some crop rotation going on. This garden is put to rest for a year, and it's in green manure while this side is growing. So you're giving your soil time to rest and recover and add more green manure to it. And soil, that's what I got, just talking about. There's different types of soil: sandy, loam, clay, silt, and each type of soil is useful in its own way. Sandy soil drains water really well, so you're not having pools sitting in your garden, but it also lets all the nutrients go away. Where loam is a very lovely medium in between the two, where clay is very tight. It has very strong bonds in it that hold the particles very close together, and so water and nutrients don't leave it very quickly. So I was talking to someone earlier about growing garlic, and I grew huge garlic. It was beautiful, and I had a very clay soil that held a lot of nutrients in it, and I think that was very beneficial for my garlic to grow, because nothing went away from the garden. Everything, including all the water, would sit up in the soil. Here you can see is a nice steaming pile of compost, of manure, which is composting. The point of composting is to get it nice and hot, so everything's breaking down. And with manure, that's in the middle of winter, when it's 30 below, a manure pile will steam, and that's everything breaking down. All the microbes in there are working away, and everything's breaking down into a nice usable compost. You don't want to use fresh manure on your garden, because that'll burn your roots, and nothing will really grow that first year. So you want a nice that's composted for at least a year. And you can use all your kitchen garden scraps for compost too, and that creates a lot of really nice microbes for the soil that when you add it into your garden, it's going to be adding much more than just the composted items into your garden. And there's also the vermiculture here. I threw these little wormies in there. And a friend of mine was doing a daycare kitchen before, and she had the vermiculture going in the kitchen, well not in the kitchen, but for the kitchen scraps, and she would throw those into the gardens outside for the kids to go and pick. Not the worms, but the vegetables that were grown in the gardens outside, so. Is that good? Yeah, okay. So the other thing I want to talk about is the things you stick in your garden to grow things, mostly trellising. When I was farming in great big huge fields, I went out of my way to not grow anything that needed to be trellised, because I couldn't stand doing huge trellises. But the small trellises are lovely and fun to use, and I have a smaller garden now. I'm really excited about putting in trellises. So there's all different ways to set up your garden. You can see here there's raised beds with no weeds around it. That's really great for growing in. You can see here they put in the obelisks. Tomatoes will grow up those really nice. Beans, anything that wants to fall over. You might have flowers that want to fall over. You can put them into these plant them with these and they'll grow up really nice. Those are fancy ones. You can also get tomato cages for free pretty much from most yard sales. There's usually a huge stack of them in places. You can find a lot of tomato cages. Growing in pots, there's all different ways to do it. You can do it fancy pots, or you can find barrels around the hood and use those. A friend of mine has used these very successfully for growing a lot of different things, for having right outside your back door, just for pulling herbs and quick things, lettuces and things that grow quickly. You can see here in this one, they put raised beds and used mulch in between to keep the weeds back. What else? Trellising is very easy to do, but very cost effectively, because we live in a place where there's a lot of bush, so as long as you can get somewhere where there's, you can make a lot of your own trellises if needed. It can be done with twine, or you can get very fancy and have beautiful metal trellises too. And yeah, I was just trying to show here too that there's so many different ways to design your garden and to have food available to you. If you have just a little balcony in your apartment, you can actually grow a fair bit of food on your little balcony there and still have a nice place to sit. So, yeah, and I think a really important thing to me in gardening too is that it's somewhere you like to be. Because if you're going to your garden and you know you're going to get super muddy and dirty and you hate being muddy and dirty, then you're not setting yourself up for success. Like if you don't like being muddy and dirty, there's a chance in this garden you get really muddy and dirty. Where in this garden, you're not going to get as muddy and dirty, right? So, and for some people getting around inside, by 1.2, do not put your beds too close together. I have suffered many times thinking I need more to grow more, so my feet are this wide, so that's how much room I need to stand in. It's a very bad idea. Give yourself enough room that you can bend down. You need like 2.5 feet. Yes, I think that's about all that I want to say about that right now.
Perfect.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah. Guess I'll
Thanks,
take a look
Renata.
here. So this is a picture of my garden. I don't know, I think it was last September. As you can see, I live in the city. I don't have a huge backyard or anything like that. My backyard garden is kind of obscuring everything else in sight. I could hide an elephant there and nobody would find it because there's so much growing there. Speaking of hats, I have 2 feet by 2 feet papers between the beds, and I thought 2 feet would be enough. Actually, 2 feet by August, it's all gone because the plants have all they're reaching for the sun. I should have made them probably 4 feet would have been good, but then I would have to move somewhere else where I have more space. So the way I plan my garden, I have 4 by 10 feet raised beds. The raised beds are about 12 inches off the ground. 4 by 10 because I used to have longer 4 by 15, and I found the middles just bowed out, and I couldn't really get it to get back into shape, so I gave up and I bought 10-foot boards, cedar boards. They're rough cuts, so they were relatively cheap, and so I don't have to sort of, stick boards together. So that's why they're 4 by 10. I have 6 of those and a bunch of other smaller things. As you can see, I have a lot of trellises. The one over there, that's actually a cattle panel that I cut. So some people use cattle panels as like arches. You can do that. I do already have an arch here. That's called the Titan squash tunnel from Bessie's. I got it like 6 years ago. It's great, but I needed more trellises, so I bought these cattle panels and I just cut them up. Some of them are attached to the beds, some are just attached to poles, so I can like move it from year to year depending on where I need it. Yeah, we can go to the next slide. So, right around now, I'm planning what I'm going to plant. And essentially, because I eat from the garden, it's all about what am I going to eat. So for me, because my space is limited, I have to be really selective about what I plant. I can't just plant something just cause. I mean, sometimes I do experiments, but basically for me, it is, I plant it if what I want to eat isn't available in stores, or it tastes better fresh from the garden, or it's much cheaper to grow than to buy, or it's easy to preserve so I can eat it throughout the year, or it helps the soil, or it boosts biodiversity, and sometimes just because it's easy to grow. So I'm from Japan myself, and there's a lot of herbs and vegetables in Japan that you can't get here. And that's why I grow like those eggplants. They're quite small. They're not like the giant eggplants you find in the stores. They're very small. They're very thin skinned. You eat it with the skin. It's practically seedless because they're small. And so I eat them in all different ways. I also like to eat faba beans. Those are in the upper left corner. Faba beans, sort of like edamame. I just, I don't let them mature. I eat them green. I just blanch them briefly in salted water, and they're really yummy. I also like Japanese or Asian cucumbers that are really thin-skinned and seedless. Shishito peppers, like I said, also like shishito peppers at Metro. A half-pound bag is $3.99, so that's pretty pricey. So it's cheaper for me to grow it than to buy it. Yeah, and tasting better fresh from the garden. You all know what that's about. Obviously, you know, tomatoes, things like that. I also grow a lot of Swiss chard because I blanch and freeze it. Giant freezer bags, and then I use it throughout the winter for, I make a really nice pork ragu out of it. It's just big chunks of pork, lots of chopped Swiss chard stems, not the leaves, just the stems, and lots of canned tomatoes. And nobody knows it's Swiss chard. My daughter, she's 5 and she loves it. It's one of her favorite dishes. It helps the soil. I plant a lot of legumes, peas, beans, that sort of thing, because it's supposed to put nitrogen back into the soil. Sometimes I grow root crops because it helps break up the soil. So thinking about soil health is also good criteria, because you don't want to keep just taking from the soil. You have to take care of it so that it'll get back. Biodiversity. So yeah, there's things that grow that I don't eat, like you can eat it, but I grow borage. The flowers are a bee magnet, and I figure that's good because they'll also come and fertilize my tomatoes and peppers and whatnot. Some things I just grow because it's easy to grow, like kale. I'm always thinking of ways to, you know, feed it to my family. You know, I started with this kale pasta, which was just kale, olive oil, and garlic. It was great at first, and then after about a year, my husband was like, I think there's more kale than pasta in this. Isn't this a bit too much? So, you know, go easy on the easy to grow. It's always easy to grow kale, but you don't always love eating it, or I don't. So, you know, I can't have it 7 days a week. Okay, next one. So, you've got what you want to grow, and then you decide what you need to get. So you can get seeds, and you know, seed packets have a lot of information, or you can source transplants. Obviously, the garden centers have a wide range of choices, and there's also some smaller growers like myself who sell maybe some varieties that, like the bigger gardening centers don't carry. And you also have to think about, so what does that plant need? Does it need a trellis, a cage? Is it gonna grow well in a pot? Does it need to go in the ground? Do you need to prep the ground? That sort of thing. So there are some plants that can sort of adapt to a variety of things, like for example, cucumbers. Some people don't trellis them. If you've got the space, you can just let them, you know, lie on the ground. I like to trellis them because I like to save space. I live in the city. And I also think about what plants do better in pots versus the ground. So mostly pots, I have these 5-gallon buckets that I drilled holes into, and they're on the deck. That means they do dry out quicker, so they need more water, but they don't get as cold. So those are good for me for things like eggplants or peppers because, well, for one, if I see frost coming in early June, I can just cart them into the garage. And also the ground warms up faster on the deck than in the actual ground. So it's nice to think about where that plant might want to be and what it needs ahead of time so that you're not sitting there with a plant and then you're like, oh wait, I need this and I need that and that sort of thing. Okay, so timing. I'm already thinking about it because I often start my early seeds like about now or early February. So you can start indoors from seed. Often you will need germination mats and lights. They don't have to be expensive. Like I got my germination mat, it's like 10 by 20 inches, probably 20, 30 bucks. Lights, I don't have special like grow lights with different color spectrums. I use just plain white lights. They're good enough. They're not good for if you want to actually harvest a tomato from it, a fruit or something like that. They're good if you are just wanting to get them to the leafy stage just before they go outside for good. So I have those shop lights suspended above plants and I have them on a chain with an S-hook so that you can raise and lower the lights. I put the lights pretty close to the seedlings because the closer they are, the more light they're getting. And sometimes some plants I start indoors from seed, like in April or May, and on nice days I can take them outside during the day. Yeah, that photo was from last year. That was probably early May, and at one point I was shuffling 300 or 400 plants inside and outside every day. It's work. You can also start seed outside in pots. Doesn't work for everything, obviously. Surprisingly, it kind of works for tomatoes. Like I get volunteer tomatoes in the garden, but not early enough to actually produce good tomatoes. So winter sowing would be things like some people do spinach or carrots. The thing with winter sowing is that there's a higher chance that not everything is going to germinate and become plants, so you might need more seed. We're actually on CD Saturday on February 22nd having a winter sowing workshop, so that's something that you could check out if you're interested in winter sowing in particular. Other than that, direct seed obviously is fairly straightforward. Things like radishes or even spinach, you pop the seed in as soon as the soil can be worked or it's above a certain temperature, and you just let it do its thing. A lot of things like peas or beans, they don't like to be moved from little pots to containers, that sort of thing, so you would do better by putting them directly in the ground. Other than that, you can buy transplants and plant in May, June, and that way you can skip all the indoor stuff, because while I said it doesn't take a ton of money to get a basic setup, it still takes up space, and it's still you're slipping things in and out and juggling trays, and then your tray breaks and things fall, and it can get pretty chaotic. Okay, so spacing. That picture is actually from several years ago, and that was a picture I sent the Master Gardeners. So 3 years ago, I was in the garden tour from the art gallery, and when they first asked me to be on the tour, I sent them this picture and said, "Are you sure you have the right person? Because I don't think I'm the kind of gardener you're looking for." I plant things super close. As you can see, this is kind of representative of what I usually do. I've got a lot going on, so much that you can't really tell what starts where and what's what. So I think seed packets and internet have good guidelines, but they often say, like space plants 6 inches apart with rows, 2 feet wide or something like that. I generally ignore the rows. If it says 6 inches apart, for me, that's kind of like 4 in a square foot. I say that because I garden in raised beds, so it's a 4 by 10, you know, it's got limited space. And also I find that, like, nature abhors a vacuum. If I have empty space, something's gonna grow there, and it's probably not gonna be a tomato or, you know, pea or whatever I want. It's probably gonna be a weed. So rather than have weeds, I plant intensively. Now that being said, more plants in the same space doesn't always mean more food. You kind of have to find the sweet spot where, you know, you're able to get more out of the garden, but you're not crowding the plants out and they're not, you know, stunted because none of them can get enough nutrients or light or things like that. It's kind of dependent on how much sun your plot gets, what kind of soil you have, you know, how often you water or fertilize, that sort of thing. So it's hard to say, but generally, I look at the seed packets and go by, you know, how many inches apart, that sort of thing. Another good resource is a book, The Square Foot Gardening Method. Some of you might have read it. The only thing is they say you can put zucchini like 1 per square foot. That's not true. That's not happening. So some things take with a grain of salt, but other things, yeah, like I think beets I put 4 in a square foot. Little gray turnips, they only get like a couple inches in diameter. I probably put 9 in a square foot. Over the years, you kind of start getting a sense for what works for you. Another important thing is when you're growing intensively, like I do, you should think about underground, surface, and above ground spaces. So what that means for me is whatever I can trellis gets trellis. For example, winter squash. I could let them go over the yard, but then nobody would be able to step foot anywhere. So I trained them to go over these trellises, and that frees up quite a lot of space. I don't let my tomatoes or cucumbers flop around either. Everything has to grow up because then they get more sunlight that way. But if I have a tomato plant, I could plant something right next to it that is not gonna take up the same space. So it's not gonna get tall. It's gonna stay sort of under the tomato leaves, and they can coexist. So I grow like maybe like small radishes or small huckleberry turnips are under a lot of things because, for one thing, they are, you know, they mature much earlier. So before that tomato or pepper plant gets really big, I'm ready to pull that radish out, and then the pepper doesn't have any competition anymore. So really, when you look at space, think about what's growing at the surface being like, you know, like spinach or lettuce or something rather relatively small, underground as in carrots or, yeah, whatever, garlic or turnips, beets, and above ground. And again, if you can raise it off the ground, you can save a lot of space, so that would be things like squash. And I've even known people who sort of trellis summer squash like zucchini. They don't really vine the same way, but they do start to meander like a couple of feet. I do find them a little tricky to sort of coax. They do what they want, but sometimes you can be successful to sort of nudge it the way you want it to go, and then it's no longer sort of covering up your Brussels sprouts or something like that. Okay. So crop rotation, this can get really complicated if you really sort of, you know, want to be strict about it. I'm not perfectly strict about it because with my space, I can be. Like, it's not like I've got, you know, huge sections that I can devote to one kind and, you know, very, you know, strategically rotate it around. I've got things going everywhere. But rule of thumb, I try to switch it up. If potatoes were in that bed that year, I'm not going to put potatoes there next year. And ideally not even tomatoes because they're kind of in the same family, right? So if you had potato bugs, for example, and they're there, they might also eat your tomatoes or your eggplants or your peppers. So generally, like, you try to switch it up so that you don't plant the same things year over year. That applies not just to avoiding pests or, you know, avoiding diseases, but also, like, the same plant will want the same nutrients from the soil. So if you keep on doing that for many years, your soil might become deficient in a particular nutrient because that plant really loves that nutrient. And it's, as a home gardener, it's hard to tell what's missing unless you get like an expensive soil test done. And by that, I don't mean like those DIY kits, but, you know, I mean sending your soil to a lab for analysis. That's expensive, so I try to just avoid problems by switching things up. If you had a problem with pests or disease the previous year, you should do research to see if you can avoid it the following year. Now, I say do research because some things, like if you had aphids are everywhere. I mean, you know, they can move and they get everywhere. Just by moving something around, you're not going to be able to avoid aphids. But if you had like carrot rust fly or, you know, leek moth on your garlic, maybe it's good to sort of be mindful of that and deliberately move it away as much as you can the following year, so that if there's any of those guys, you know, overwintering in the debris, they're not gonna just be like, oh, here it is, my food, it's all ready for me. You don't wanna set up like a perfect habitat for those pests. So if you had a problem last year, then try to read up about it and see if it's something that can be avoided or mitigated by moving the location of that particular type of plant. Companion planting. Yeah, as you can see, my vegetables have no lack of friends. They've got lots of companions. There's tons of info on the internet about plants that help each other. It can be a little overwhelming. I do try to avoid plants that don't get along well. Like they say, garlic doesn't like legumes like peas and beans. I do try to avoid that, but I can't logically, you know, plan so that everybody's got their best buddy, but it's not being planted where somebody was last year, and then it just becomes like a puzzle that you will never solve. So generally, I try to avoid plants that don't get along well, and if possible, I try to plant things like leafy things, like lettuce next to beans, something like that to, you know, for the lettuce to take advantage of the nitrogen that the beans put in the ground. Most importantly, I try to avoid competition for the same space. So what that means is, you know, sort of staggering tall plants versus short plants instead of having all the tall plants in one section of your bed. Or like lettuce doesn't need, you know, 10 hours of sun a day, so I don't mind if there's a wall of beans in front of the lettuce because the lettuce is going to be fine, whereas the beans do more of that sun. So I take like a graph sheet. You can just print it off the internet, like a grid, and because my beds are usually 4 by 10, you know, I do like 4 squares by 10 squares, and I try to pencil it out, and I try to sort of keep copies of it every year. I have 2 versions because what I intend to do is not the same thing as what happens. So I have my plan for 2025, and then later I do what actually happened in 2025. And then I just keep it in a binder so that I, you know, when I'm looking back at things, I don't have to sort of second guess myself and wonder, oh, where did I put those potatoes last year? I don't quite remember. So it's good to keep written records. If you're like me and you get busy, you forget, so always having something written down to fall back on is a great idea. So,
Now it's my turn.
yeah, I can pass it to you.
Do you want to be my button presser?
Sure.
I'll go maybe doesn't necessarily pop into your mind as part of garden planning, but I think that I would like, and we would all like for that to change, and for seed saving to be considered an integral part of gardening, period. And you can think of seed saving as like planning ahead for next year's garden, because you're gonna need seeds. And if you're growing food in your garden or flowers, chances are you're also growing seeds, so you might as well think about saving. So I'm gonna kind of structure this the same way that Ayano did about planning your garden, because I feel like seed saving just really overlaps really nicely with all of the activities of gardening anyways. So if you're thinking about seeding from your garden, which obviously you think you should, you can maybe start by deciding what you want to grow and then thinking about could you also save seed from that. And the answer is like you could save any seed that you want really, but there are some that are definitely kind of more straightforward to save. And so the handout that you got, like the test, that's one of the tests that we put on your seeds, that's got kind of a list of some pretty common crops. And there's a column I think where it talks about whether or not you want to direct seed it or transplant it, kind of to what Ayano was talking about with the timing. And then the far column, one of the columns, is like kind of a degree of difficulty for seed saving. And so if you're thinking, maybe, what do I want to save my seeds from? You can check that column and see, and if it's easy, well then that's pretty straightforward. And if it's trickier, it doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means there's maybe some more considerations. So when you decide what seeds you want to save, you want to make sure that they're open pollinated varieties, and your seed packs will tell you that. It'll say heirloom or open pollinated, or else it'll say hybrid. And you can save seeds from hybrids. The thing is that when you plant those seeds out the next year, they're not going to look like the plants you saved the seeds from. So the reason people often say start with open pollinated seeds and save open pollinated seeds is if you save a seed from a little, I don't know, whatever salad size yellow tomato that you love that grew on this perfectly well behaved bush plant, if that's an open pollinated tomato, you plant it out, save those seeds, you plant them next year, you'll get more of those plants that you would love the year before. If it's a hybrid, you'll get a whole bunch of different plants that maybe look nothing like that original plant. And so you're still gonna get tomato plants, but it might not be what you're looking for. So if you start with open pollinated seeds, that's a really good way to start. And usually the simplest crops to start with are peas, beans, and tomatoes. And seed saving can really dovetail really nicely with gardening. Like this is an example of a tomato harvest. I squeezed out the tomatoes seeds into this jar, and then I just took the half tomatoes and put them on a tray with a little olive oil, and well, those ones I just dehydrated, but sometimes I'll either dehydrate them in the oven or I just like kind of oven roast them and then throw them in the freezer for the winter. And so it's kind of like a way to double dip, and a lot of crops will let you do that. So then you need to decide what you need to get, and sometimes seed crops need a little bit of extra help. Typically tomatoes, as you just saw, you're gonna be harvesting your tomatoes and growing them the same way, whether or not you're gonna take the seeds out of them. So they don't really need anything extra if you're saving seeds from tomatoes. But say you wanna save some seeds from your big, beautiful sunflowers, which is also a really easy one to do. You might need to protect those from the birds, because everybody loves sunflower seeds. The middle picture that is really, it's a terrible picture, but these are lettuce plants. Lettuce is also a fairly straightforward crop to save seed from, except that it takes a little bit longer, and often if the weather starts to get wet, that can really damage the seed. So this is like literally a garbage structure that I built over my lettuce plants to try to keep them dry, so that the seed could finish maturing. So they just needed a bit of extra protection, and it worked. So it doesn't necessarily have to look pretty. Another option, or another thing that is a consideration with seed is sometimes they just need some space to dry. So you've got your, maybe you've got your sunflowers and the birds are trying to get to all the seeds. And you've got a lot of seeds on the heads, but they're not quite dried down yet. You can just cut those heads off and stick them somewhere safe to dry, but you need somewhere safe to dry. So this is a picture of my woodshed full of radish seeds drying. the timing for growing crops for seed, again, tomatoes, peas, beans, same as just growing them for food. I guess if you're growing peas and beans for seed, you're just gonna leave them on the plant longer, till they get way past the eating stage, ideally till they get dry, and then you can pick them, let them keep drying, and then when they're really crispy, then you've got seed. But some things take a little bit longer. They're often the things that I think of, like that kind of hide their seeds. Like, where does a carrot store its seeds? Where does an onion store its seeds? And like, the answer is next year. It stores them in the future. So some crops take 2 years to grow. So if you want to grow carrots for seed, you're gonna grow carrots, and then you're gonna store them for the winter in a cold room or in your fridge. And then you're gonna plant them out for next year, like the entire carrot. You're just gonna pop it back in the ground. And by August, you're gonna have this like patch of big, beautiful Queen Anne's lace looking blooms. And then from there, you'll end up getting carrot seed. And it'll be on kind of umbels that look similar to dill. Like if you've ever seen dill flowers go to seed, carrots are related, and so they'll do a similar kind of thing. So the timing can be a consideration and can make it a little bit trickier, but again, not impossible. There's just some more information you need to know. And like the other picture, like lettuce, that's a pretty straightforward one to grow, but it doesn't take long to make a head of lettuce that you want to eat, but to be able to harvest the seed is usually the end of August or September. And then, lettuce again. Spacing is also like, it's typically if you're growing for seed, well, I don't know about typically. Some things just need more space sometimes, right? Again, tomatoes, peas, beans, they don't need any more space. Lettuce, I'll often plant it as if I'm just gonna harvest heads of lettuce, and then I will strategically harvest heads of lettuce to then give the remaining plants enough space, which is about a foot each, to be able to get to their full glorious size so that they can make seed. So there's just some kind of strategy there, and it's kind of a good way to be able to get to eat the food you wanna eat, and then just save some for the seed for next year. So again, kind of another way of double dipping. Another consideration with spacing is you want to have enough plants so that they're kind of, the technical term is like a minimum population. So ideally, you're not going to just save your tomato seeds for one tomato plant. You're going to maybe have like 4 or 5 to save seeds from. Just to have a bit of that genetic, you just don't want them to get inbred, basically, is what you're trying to avoid. And so different crops need different numbers of family members to kind of share in that genetic mix match to keep from being inbred. And then on the flip side, you also need to keep them away from things that they'll cross-pollinate with. So tomatoes, peas, beans, and lettuce are the ones that grow really well here that are considered and called self-pollinating, which means they're not gonna really do too much sharing of their genetic material with each other. But some crops, like squash, if you've ever grown like a zumpkin, has anybody had this? Like a zucchini that looks like a pumpkin, or a pumpkin that looks, that is an example of what happened the year before when a zucchini and a squash plant got cross-pollinated, and the seed out of one of those two plants grew into something unexpectedly different. And again, just like with planting out seeds from a hybrid, it's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just unexpected and maybe a little bit less reliable. So you want to consider spacing to make sure that things aren't cross-pollinating. And so Ayano has a trickier time with this, being in the city and gardening with, small spaces, and also maybe neighbors who are also growing cucumbers, and cucumbers are ones that'll get cross-pollinated. So it's a consideration, but there's all sorts of different things you can do, and I won't get into them because it'll maybe be too much information, but if people have specific questions, I'm totally happy to answer them. So yeah, spacing for seed growing, you just typically need more space. You want to have some family members around, but you also want to be aware of who else is growing where. And then the last piece that we just wanted to touch on, and this might be relevant to a bunch of you guys in the next month or so, is testing. So it's really easy to find out if the seeds you've saved or if that old package of seed that you found at the bottom of your whatever Tupperware gardening stuff is actually going to grow this year. You can do what's called the germ test, and it's pretty simple to do. I just use paper towel and a Sharpie, and I'll write the name of what it is I'm testing on the paper towel before it gets wet, and then I'll put it under the tap, get it wet, bring it out, lay it out, and then here I put a lot of seeds, but you can often just do like 10 even. 10 seeds, fold it over, and then slip it into a Ziploc bag, or I often will just use a Tupperware with the lid sitting on it, but not super tight. And then you just want to keep it somewhere like pretty warm. On top of the fridge is often like an easy place to do it. And you can just check on it like every day, make sure it's not drying out. And usually within a week or two, you'll see if your seeds have germinated or rotted, or some have germinated and some have rotted. And you can make your decision about whether or not you want to plant out those seeds, or maybe how many of them you want to plant based on those results. And there's tons of info online about germ testing. And there's tons of different ways to go about it. You can get really, really technical. I just printed up a document this year from the government, which is like, it's like 250 pages of like technical how to do germ tests. And there's like some useful things in there, but mostly I still just do this. So, yeah, and I just think one of the hesitations I remember for me when I first started saving seed and planting it, like, is this any good? Like, I felt like I didn't know what I was doing, and that there must be some magic thing that happens with like people who grow seed to know that it's good seed. But plants are really good at making seed, and you just kind of have to be there to collect it and make the selections and save the seeds from the tomatoes that taste the best to you, or the peas that look the most delicious. What was the thing I heard once was, save the best and eat the rest. So, yeah, and I guess the last thing I just want to say about seed saving is that it's a really cool way to get to know more about the plants you're growing in your garden, period. Because you get to see them go, not just to the place where you want to eat them, but you kind of get to see them through their entire life cycle. And it's another really good way to learn some of the things that like Ayano and Renata were talking about like, maybe try to answer those questions of like, why doesn't this do that well here? Or like, how much space does this need? Or how long does this need? And who does it grow well with? And like, I just remember the first time growing carrot seeds and realizing, like, you look so much like dill and parsnip and cilantro and all of these things, and realizing that they're families, and so they're not identical, but there's definitely maybe similarities in terms of what they all like. So it's just like kind of a sneaky way to learn more about plants. I think that's maybe all I have to say, but maybe I don't remember actually. I have to say thank you. So there's tons of great information online. I also actually brought a huge collection of like old small farm magazines and seed catalogs. They're like free for the taking. So you can make them disappear if you want, if anything looks interesting. These are a few websites that we would direct folks to as being really great ones with information on them. I think that's it. And then I feel like what we shared was really vague, not vague, but like kind of overview. And I imagine that folks maybe have like some really specific questions. And so we're happy to dig in and answer any of those that you might have. Yeah.
Why wouldn't you save heirloom seeds?
Yeah, you could totally save heirloom seeds. Heirlooms are typically open pollinated seeds. Yeah. Yeah, hybrids are the ones that,
I grow more for that.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I saved some seeds for my heirloom tomatoes this year.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're gonna work or not, but I dried them out, I just leave them on the counter. The way to,
Yeah.
okay, and then also when should I start? Should I go in the little cups to the germination part of it?
Like to start germ testing them, or to start growing them for
No, like starting like in the little cups, you know, the germinating, like the.
yeah, to like actually
Yeah,
grow
yeah.
them to be the plants to plant out? usually start mine until the middle of April, but I think I might be on the later side. What do you?
I think it's early.
April 15th is my birthday, so it's easy to remember.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do March.
Yeah, I would
Yeah.
say
Oh, and also,
It really
you
depends, I think.
said by, not planting them in the same spot, will I have like, the side of my house there, is it really hot there, that's usually where tomato plants? If you put more, soil and nutrients in the garden, would it still be okay to plant there, tomatoes, or?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of one of the big things about gardening is like, you can't always do everything perfect, right? So if that's the spot where they love to grow, yeah, you might just wanna make sure that you're topping up that soil and keeping it healthy, and just keep an eye out for bugs or disease, and you'll know if you have a problem.
Am I allowed to ask a question?
Of course.
It's more of a comment, but I really liked the part of Ayano's presentation where she was talking about space between the plants. Because when Joanne and I gave our presentation 4 weeks ago to many of you same folks, we more or less said, see what the packet says about rows and spacing, and do that. But I wasn't taking into account that not everybody grows in rows, and when you've got a limited space or raised beds and that kind of thing, forget the stuff about rows, and I would use Ayano's system of just determining your spacing on the space within the rows that's recommended in the packets, which is usually 6 or 8 inches or whatever, and see how it goes. But that was an insight for me.
I just have a comment to make about compost. I was at the dump because they have that tree compost pile. And for those of you who don't know, I was on site and I called the city and I said, you tell me why there's no weeds growing in your compost pile. Because it seems strange to me, there's nothing growing in there. And they said that they add an accelerator to the compost, which makes it too hot to grow. So it's good if you're gonna do maybe a lawn or something that's, but if you're gonna, you can't use it for gardening. So,
I also just wanted to make a comment about this little paper here. I originally made it up because I've grown for a long time. A lot of times you're like, oh, someone gave you some free plants and you stick them in your garden, or you don't know what to grow, so you just buy some seed packs that look nice at the store, and then you grow a bunch of food and you either don't know how to cook it, or you think it's disgusting, or you kind of regret that it took up that precious space and your time. So it's kind of a good thing to go through and say, hey, what do I actually like eating? What do I want to learn how to cook? What did my mom make or my neighbor make last year that I really loved that they grew in their garden? And to kind of just think about it ahead, because it's really, really easy to buy a lot of seed and a lot of transplants. And then you feel like you have to stick them all into your small space. So sometimes it's good to just really think that through and plan what you want to put where in your garden, what you actually really, really love growing. So a friend of mine laughed when she saw it. She's like, oh, I've needed this sheet.
It's me again. I'm intrigued by the comment on compost, because I work for the city of Thunder Bay in that very department. And they may well use that, but I'm gonna find out for when we meet in 4 weeks to find out about that. We do recommend the compost for lawns and flower gardens, and the reason we haven't recommended specifically for vegetable gardens is because it's a municipal compost system, so we're not controlling what's going in. But I'll find out about the accelerator if they're adding something to that.
Makes me wonder what they're doing out there, because my aunt had told my mom that if you want to accelerate your compost, just get an pee on it.
Oh, we don't have enough staff for that.
And that's the thing too, when a compost is hot, it's actually burning off a lot of disease. So when I had that steaming manure pile, when I've had animals, I'll have a steaming manure pile and nothing grows on it because it's too hot. So it doesn't mean necessarily that they're putting something bad on it. It just means that they're really getting those microbes to really, really work hard and to really turn that organic matter into compost that can be used. So even you can get accelerants, not accelerants, but there's all different things you can use in gardening that you might think, oh, that's bad, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. Like sometimes there's things to help your plants grow roots more quickly when you're starting transplants and things. Some of them might be not something you'd want to necessarily use if you're gardening organically. Other ones are completely safe to use. So even though something might appear to be a bad thing, I don't want to use anything that's like an accelerant. There are things that are actually really biologically sound to use when you're gardening to help the process in all different ways.
Don't you make compost or like the city out of Christmas trees?
And
Would
pumpkins.
that make it really acidic? And like when you go for a walk in a bush, you don't find a lot of things growing under the coniferous trees. So
That's absolutely true. But only a tiny amount of our compost is from the Christmas trees. There's so much else going in there, I don't think it makes it too acid.
I was gonna say, a lot of people look at their gardens and say, this is my vegetable garden, this is my flower garden, this is my fruit garden. And they keep them separate without realizing you can plant something in with your vegetables or your flowers or your whatever. And it makes a much more diverse growing for the soil, as well as what's been coming in to fertilize either the flower or the vegetable or the fruit, that can actually enhance it a lot, whereas people seem to think, no, I have to have vegetables here. And I have a garden that goes this way along my house, and therefore I can't put vegetables in there because people think I'm crazy. Well, gardeners are generally crazy people anyway. You know, right? But, so sometimes when I go by places and I see that, I'm wondering like, why have you got these huge spaces? Well, because they didn't know what I wanted to plant in it. I said, well, you have 5 tomatoes jammed so close together, you're gonna get half a dozen tomatoes. Move one of them over there, or your herbs, or something like that. Like some of the vegetables, like even your your beets have beautiful green and red in the stems and everything. There's nothing wrong with having that in your flower garden or whatever type of thing, whereas people sometimes are so regimented. When I have a 5.5 acre gardens too, and my dog makes sure that things get moved into other spots. He's quite good at that, and I always know where he's been in the garden, because he will smell some rosemary or mint, or he'll have tomato seeds hanging up the corner of his mouth, but he doesn't destroy anything. And if he thinks he'll go eat a carrot, and if he doesn't care, he'll leave the greens in the big white pass. If not, he takes them to the compost pile. Don't know why, nobody taught him. It's just something he does, so he's moving stuff around as well. Sometimes I'm looking for something going, okay, Seamus, where the heck did he put this one? And he actually digs a little hole and puts them back in. But he'll eat beans and everything, he won't blow anything up, but he'll eat right up in a little wee bit of bean or pea left, and doesn't blow anything out, and I keep wondering, where have you learned this from? But he's in the gardens all the time. So, but I just think we need to be a little bit less stringent on, this has to be vegetables, this has to be this has to be that.
Yeah,
I mean,
totally.
you can grow beans and everything up a fruit tree, or whatever, there's lots of options.
Yeah, there's things that plants like and things that they prefer, and it's nice to get to, I like that, because it's like, the more you get to know the plants, and the more you get to know the space that you're gardening in, the more you can kind of step away from feeling like you need to just follow the rules, and kind of just let the creativity and the natural flow of things happen, right? And not feel like things need to be in their specific boxes, but just kind of let them work together, because it is just a whole bunch of factors working together, right? Yeah.
Okay, thank you, I have to go. I don't know how long it lasted.
Nitrogen back into the soil, your PCB.
Yeah.
I don't have it end of the year, you pull your plant out roots and all, but I just learned you're supposed to snip it off that soil level and beat it.
You can do it different ways. I mean, the keys, like the legumes have, if you've ever pulled them up and you've looked at the roots, there's little nodules, right? And that's where they're collecting the nitrogen. When you turn the entire plant back in, for a while, it actually takes nitrogen out of the ground as that plant material is breaking down. But then once it's done breaking maybe be a bit of a timing thing, you know what I mean? So if you're doing that in October, you're putting all your plants back in, come May, because we have such, it gets so cold and everything slows down so much, it might still be actually pulling nitrogen out of the soil for that first part of the summer. So,
And also a note on that too, that where the nodules are often a finer root. Like when you pull it up, you get a bit of a stalk coming out and a little bit of root, but most of the root has actually stayed in the ground. So I never actually pulled it out and looked at it at that point. Usually there's too many coming out at the same time, but it'd be interesting to look and see how many little pink nodules are actually coming out of the ground when you do that and how many are actually staying in the ground.
especially if you have clay soil.
Especially if it's soil. There's that too.
We started, making containers in our garden because our lawn is made out of hay. And you can't get those roots out. They come through that fabric and everything. So we started making containers. What is the best thing to put down first when you make your container?
Like under the container. That's a good question.
Yeah.
Do you have an open bottom container or a closed bottom? Open. Mine are all closed bottom.
Mine are all open, and when I did mine, I put cardboard down, brown cardboard,
Okay.
like multiple layers, just mostly because that was most easily accessible and cheapest for me. There's lots of things you can do, but oftentimes you choose what's easier and cheaper because you don't want to spend a fortune on it. So I did cardboard. I just made sure that the cardboard, it looked ugly, stuck out on all four sides by at least a foot because the grass is going to come through. But if I make it stick out like at least a foot or maybe even more, then it kind of doesn't totally eliminate, but mostly slows down that grass creeping in.
Oh, okay.
So I use that.
Okay, yeah, we didn't do that, so maybe we'll.
There's some higher grade landscape fabric also
Sorry.
that's you can buy, and it's a much heavier, thicker weave. Like some of the landscape fabric you buy is very, very thin and flimsy, and everything will grow through it. And it'll be a great way to not be able to take weeds out of your garden. But you can get much heavier grade ones, and those ones actually, the hay will not come through. So, and they'll actually get rid of them. And around your containers, at least 1.5 feet around them, just to keep, and in between, at least 3 feet in between your beds. You can take a wheelbarrow down in between them. You want a nice space in between so you can walk around whatever pots you're putting out, and underneath you might want to just put a whole bunch of landscape fabric and maybe put it a few deep, right? Get a heavy grade one, not a light flimsy one.
Okay, so I was thinking of that black, plastic, but then I got thinking, is there anything that leaches from that plastic into the soil, like, is that a concern or no?
If you're buying, I don't know if there's a right answer. Like I've thought of a lot of plastics in a lot. So if you get a landscape fabric that's going to last for a long period of time, generally you're not. If you're planting on, you're not pulling nutrients up into your plant. They're leaching up. It's going to leach down. If anything is leaching, or you're watering from the top where your plants are, and it's going to be going the other way.
In the old days, we used to use, old days, it sounds old, but telephone books.
Oh, yeah.
The telephone books outside, and then you want one blown out, and the telephone books are about this big, but before they used to measure. And they do that, and then they would top dress it with a bunch of other stuff before they ever even thought about putting dirt and everything else on it too. So anything that's heavy, thick, it's gonna take a while to break down, and back then, the telephone books weren't colored or, color pages and all.
Wow, you're really dating yourself.
And you get the senior citizen plus. Clean the garden for 55, 60 years.
You have to be aware too that if you wanna make sure that if your plants need drainage, that you raise some of the pots up if they need extra drainage. Because they don't drain if they're right on the ground, like let's say if you're growing potatoes in pots, I put like a 2x4 or something that you need to allow the water to drain out.
Yeah, and you might also want to think about how deep those beds are. And
what you're gonna plant in them, because my fear with landscape fabric is my beds are 12 inches deep. If I plant potatoes, there's a pretty good chance I'm gonna put my shovel through it, so, yeah. But if yours are 3 feet deep, then that's probably not a concern at all.
I use the horse troughs, is what I use. You just put one in last year. And you drill holes in the bottom and some around the side. Then I took pots, 1 gallon pots, turned upside down across the whole thing. And then I put, not a gravel, but about that big size gravel type thing, all the way to the top of the pots. And then I put down my different layers, like my, cardboard and various things like that down. And then I put my soil, and my soil was about 2.5, 3 feet deep on top of that. And then each year I turn that part, top part over and add more nutrient in, plus my beans and all that kind of stuff. I just lie, I dig a trench in the beans and all that kind of stuff, get right in there, the plants, so they break down over the whole winter in a trench and stuff like that. So it's a closed pot. But, and underneath all of that, I have crushed gravel, and I also have the carpet turned upside down as well, and I never had an issue with anything that I've busted and nothing with it. And, so, I've also used kids' swimming pools, put up on a table, with holes in it, this much dirt grows beautiful lettuces, and, there's all, you know, I mean, there's what, I say gardeners are crazy people, so, crazy things.
No, the next door's full,
Yeah.
whatever they can find.
Yeah, exactly, big boiler steel.
Or raspberries.
So the way that you get around that is to just make sure that you cut, you know, just go around your bed with the shovel and just cut the roots off. And then if anything does come up in your bed, you just yank it out and it's called catch them. Maybe 6 weeks a week.
Great suggestion.
Any other questions, comments?
For things that you can't really move, like asparagus, do you just watch what you plant with it to bring back those nutrients it takes? Or like,
Well, asparagus is a funny one. Asparagus, when you plant it, you wanna dig a 2.5 foot deep hole, and then you wanna fill it up with, all sorts of organic matter and really nutritious food for the plant. And then you want 6 inches below the top of the soil, you put the crown down, this little spaghetti kind of hairs, and then you cover it up again. And that's its base. And then you might have to, I don't know how much you feed it after that, like asparagus just wants to grow. So your biggest competition with asparagus is weeds, and I wanted to do this for years and I finally did it. I planted summer ryegrass in my asparagus, like all around, and it held back all the weeds and none came up. So I was really happy, so, yeah. And then that's gonna feed the soil, and it's gonna keep it happy, right? Cause that just winter kills, and you just put some more down the next spring, so.
I've also heard of planting strawberries with asparagus. I haven't done it yet, but I've been really curious about it because supposedly they don't compete for the same things, and so they could potentially coexist is what I've heard. So, oh.
That's what I do.
Oh, you do?
And they worked really wonderfully for about 15 years.
Okay.
And now my asparagus is so vigorous that it's outcompeted the strawberries.
Okay.
But,
You got 15 years of strawberries.
And you know, who can complain about